Okay, so it's 10:30. We're going to go ahead and start. Welcome. My name is Melissa Helquist, and I am in my everyday life, I teach writing at a community college, writing and technical writing. But I'm an accessibility researcher and advocate, and I do work with various organizations to help with training for accessibility and with some consulting, specifically with a focus on literacy practices and access to digital literacy. So that's me, and our two panelists are going to introduce themselves in more detail in a minute, but just a very quick introduction. On my left is Sabine, and then on my right is Nguyen, and they are going to tell you more about their backgrounds in just a minute. So we're focusing on assistive technology and digital equity. And just an FYI, we're just going to be talking today, but we do have our slides linked on the shared Google Docs note, so you can go there and then also upload it on Sketch, so depending on your preference. In those slides, there's our contact information for each of us. We're all open to contact and questions after the session. And then there's also some links to a few resources to kind of help you continue on this learning journey. And then just kind of an overview of our session today. After we do, I'm going to kind of set a couple of definitions so we're all kind of grounded in the same way. And then Sabine and Kim are going to introduce themselves. And then we'll have some moderated conversation where I'm just talking with both of them. And then they've put together a very, I think, compelling call to action for everyone here in the room. And then after that, we'll have time for questions. We're going to try to leave a pretty good space of time for questions. But again, if you have a question that you want to ask, find one of us later or contact us via email. So, all right, so we want to start with two definitions, what we're talking about today, both digital equity and assistive technology. Everyone here obviously has some understanding of digital equity, but digital equity means something specific when we're talking about it in relationship to disability, and it's important to understand that specific connection so that the needs of people with disabilities are addressed thoroughly. So the definition that we have for digital equity comes from the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which the US is not a signatory to, but it guides a lot of accessibility and disability action throughout the world. So no surprise, they define information and communication technology as a basic human right. And the document says, without technology, basic rights such as access to education and employment and participation in social, cultural, and political aspects of society cannot be realized for persons with disabilities. And I've linked to that in the slides. It's an important document, so if you're not familiar with it, I recommend you review some of its guidelines and materials. And then for assistive technology, the definition that we have is from the IDEA Act, which is U.S. legislation specifically for kids in K-12. But it has a very concise definition of assistive technology. So any item, piece of equipment, or product system, whether acquired commercially, off the shelf, modified, or customized, that is used to increase, maintain, or improve the functional capabilities of people with disabilities. So those are the two basic definitions we're going to be working with. digital equity is a human right, and it means something specific for people with disabilities. And then assistive technology is any item, any system, whether it's purchased or modified, that provides access for people with disabilities. So, okay. So Sabine, do you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Melissa. My name is Sabine Rear. I'm the accessibility specialist at the Assistive Technology Lab at Community Vision, which is a small assistive technology education and consultation space here in Portland. Our office is located across the river on Southeast Division. Unfortunately, the showroom part of it has been closed for the better part of the last couple of years, but we work out of a building that is designed using universal design principles, and the goals of the space broadly are to build capacity in the community and in professionals who support people with disabilities around what assistive technology is and how to use it. We provide, myself and the two co-directors and founders, we're a small team, and we provide consultations around assistive technology for people seeking to solve problems or achieve goals related to just any aspect of their life in which disability is a significant barrier. I'm also the Oregon affiliate to the Northwest ADA Center, which is located in Seattle. And I provide technical assistance and training related to the ADA. And I'm a blind lady about town. Here in this space, Melissa provided a definition of assistive technology, and I encourage y'all to think about that pretty broadly. So assistive technology could be anything from glasses to a piece of cardboard folded over to get a tool at the correct angle for someone with limited mobility, all the way up to a dedicated communication device with specialized software. But in this context, since we're here to talk about net inclusion, I'm going to try to keep it close to things of relevance to accessing digital equity and feeling included, welcomed, capable in the context of being online, using digital tools, and being a digital citizen. The last thing I want to add, I think, before I hand it to Kim is I'm going to be speaking a little bit about universal design, which I think often people associate with architecture. But I think the universal design is something that assistive technology as a field has kind of taken under its wing as a set of principles that can support the ways we think about tools and designing tools and designing spaces, including digital spaces, to be the most accessible to the most people. Often, universal design is directed at broadening the scope of use or the scope of capacity of a space or a tool. And when that specifically supports the engagement of people with disabilities, then we start to call it assistive technology. So universal design is one way to move beyond sort of that baseline of compliance provided by the ADA or the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. It won't support every access need, but it's a great baseline. So just one additional sort of definition to get us started. And I'll pass it over to Kim.
Thank you so much. So first, I just want to say how happy I am to be here. This morning we were welcomed and told we will find our people here, and that is definitely how I feel in terms of, a community of people who care and are advocating for others. So just happy to be here. So I describe myself as a researcher and an advocate, and in the digital equity space in particular, my passion is advocating for older adults and for digital inclusion. So I describe myself as a lifelong feeler, which means essentially that the plight of others is oftentimes my plight that I take on. So I observed my mother's struggle with technology. She lives in California, I live in Texas, and So I decided to do a research project about it. I was in school at the time. So I studied older adults and technology. So how does this relate to you? It's estimated that in 4 years, and this is a jarring statistic, and I'm putting it in there just for kind of the wow factor, but it's predicted that in 4 years there will be more people in the United States wearing adult undergarments than baby diapers. So that essentially means the population of older adults is really growing quickly and will soon outnumber children. And then the other reason why I think it matters to you is just that technology is changing so quickly. You can be tech savvy today, and that does not mean you can be tech savvy tomorrow. You know, I mean, every day there's a new invention, a new app, new something, and just keeping up is really challenging. So back to my research study. I conducted it in 2021. I interviewed 15 older adults ranging in age from 65 to 87. They lived in California, Texas, District of Columbia, and Utah. And I asked 3 questions. How do you use technology? What barriers get in your way? And what can be done to improve technology for you? And just to clarify, when I talk about technology, because it's such a broad field, right? I limited it to laptop computers, tablets, and smartphones, and of course, internet. So study findings were, and this will not be a surprise, but older adults use technology to connect with others, for information, for doing basic chores and work. Disabilities do result in some strain for the people that I interviewed, but it does not prevent them from using any of the technologies. Problems are technical for them because the user interfaces are unintuitive. They all value technology, every one of them. Even the least confident user values the strength of technology. However, they question, in many cases, how they kind of fit in. They feel excluded in general. Even the super users feel that technology is designed for younger people. There's a lack of training, a lack of access to help resources, and then ageism, and those who believe some of the ideas of ageism prevents them from, at times, wanting to use technology and to learn to use technology. So the study recommendations were simplify and create an intuitive, user-friendly experience. Something as simple, one of the people I interviewed said, create a giant help button on your laptop where you can just hit help, you know, none of this Control, Alt, Delete technical language. And really important, involve older adults in product design and solutions. So begin with a user in mind. Design for the users versus the masses, which is how it's currently being done. Also, so here are the study recommendations. Train users and non-users. There's some research that talks about warm experts. So warm experts are those who are kind of like trusted. It could be family members. In many cases, for the people that I interviewed, grandchildren are the warm experts. And then also enlist tech-savvy older adults to teach their peers. Maybe have dedicated helplines that are staffed by people who are comfortable and know how to work with older adults. Make getting help easy and accessible. So bring help, bring training to older adults, especially those who may have mobility issues. And then also minimize the use of technology in solving technology problems. And that's it.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Kim and Sabine. So the first question is for both of you, so I don't know, Sabine, if you want to respond first. How do you see issues around digital equity come up for the people you serve or in your community at large?
Thanks, Melissa, and thanks very much, Kim. So digital equity, I think, shows up for people with disabilities, specifically around access, which is a word I think you're going to hear a lot, both in the realm of assistive technology universal design, and digital equity. And when I've been thinking about this and when we've been talking about it together, I've been kind of using the language of like a capital A access, meaning specifically disability-related accessibility, right? Not being able to get in the door, the digital door, whether that's to use a tool or to engage with a space based on barriers related to disability and accessibility. That might show up around website design that doesn't accommodate a screen reader or doesn't provide adequate description. That might show up around a tool that doesn't have adequate settings available to make it more accessible or to interact with accessibility tools that the user might be attempting to work collaboratively with that site or tool. Or it might be a barrier to understanding or usability. And then in addition to that, we see an intersecting area of access, which I'm going to kind of try to speak with a lowercase a, but not sideline, which is experiential and identity-based access issues related to class, related to geography, related to associated with class, like financial access, and also related to support, right? And sort of the term warm user, I think, is super useful when we think about like how people find their way to technology and then find their way into comfortable, like confident use of that technology and engagement that makes them feel successful without always looking for, like you say, a technology solution or also looking for a hand-holding solution. So when we consult with people around universal design for buildings, we really try to push the brakes when someone says, we'll identify a problem and someone will say, oh, well, there'll always be someone here at the desk to help them find that. Well, that's great, possibly, but that is not an independent solution. It's not a solution that promotes independence, and it's also a solution that is pretty valuable. And so when we think about that in the context of digital equity, like empowerment is kind of a big word for this, but you want to empower people to engage with digital tools and digital spaces on their own terms and to be able to feel successful. And I definitely see issues of digital equity connecting with that with our clients who come in and feel already locked out of a tool. Someone's handed them a tool and they don't know what to do with it, or they need access to a tool that they can't afford or can't understand, or that doesn't meet their access needs. And this is something that we see come up a lot around the workplace, around leisure, around communication and connection. It's a big issue, and for people with disabilities, it's a complex issue because depending on the nature of the disability and the complexity of the body or the mind, the access solutions are going to vary pretty widely. And some are really well understood, and you see a lot of growth in those areas in the world of sort of technological development, and some are not, and you see a lot of like very slapdash solutions from people in our position or from support people or families that are really creative but aren't fundamentally supported in the development space.
And I would add, in terms of, if you think about older adults and some challenges that some older adults have with technology, what I didn't talk about earlier was the isolation factor, right? So if you think back to COVID days when we were all on lockdown, you know, that ability to connect with people, connect to information, you know, a lot of us who are lucky enough to work from home, that's how we did it. And so social isolation for older adults in particular is described as harmful as smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. So for older adults in particular, being able to not only have access to technology, but be comfortable and know how to use it is essential. And you know, I'm sure you all have heard about signing up for the COVID vaccine, right? So who were the people who were allowed to sign up first? Older adults and people with immunocompromised people. And yet, older adults, in many cases, there's stories of people who they don't have internet, they don't have a computer at home. And so how were these people signing up? How were some of the most vulnerable populations signing up for the vaccine? I heard a story recently of a man who walked into CVS, older man, wanting to get his booster shot. And so he's in the pharmacy, and the lady says, well, you've got to download the app, and then you got to make an appointment. And instead of, saying, well, you're here, let's see how we can help you that you're here. And, so it's just like barrier after barrier, potentially. And I'm generalizing. We have a lot of very tech-savvy older adults. But that's definitely one of the issues for this population in particular.
So this next question is mainly for you, Sabine, but Kim, if you want to jump in as well. How do you facilitate successful integration of technology and assistive technology into people's lives?
Yeah, thank you. So this is a big part of the work that we do at the AT Lab, and something that I think is pretty critical. And I've already kind of touched on the main point, which is support and a variety of supports, and not assuming that the same support is going to be available over time, but using structures of support to foster independent use. So when someone comes to us seeking a particular type of technology, or maybe not even knowing what type of technology they're looking for, but wanting to have a certain type of experience, wanting to be more successful at work, or wanting to engage more fully in an online community, or use a new phone or whatever. We'll start by showing them a lot of options, trying to make a balance between not being too overwhelming, but also giving them a sense of what is out there. And in our space, we can't have everything. We're a pretty small office, so the idea is just to have enough to let people know that things are out there, because I think it can be kind of discouraging when you live in a disabled body to bump into the same barriers over and over. And like you say, people start to kind of self-select out of certain experiences as they run into those barriers repeatedly. So we try to show people what's out there, dial into something that's going to work, and then really give people the opportunity to start to feel independent while being available to answer questions. And that's kind of where support structures in the home, or support care workers, therapists, those kinds of people come in. We try really hard to get a sense of what people's support structures are like, because I really like what you said about not providing technical solutions. Like, what we don't want to do is be constantly sending people to the FAQ page. Especially if there's someone who struggles to type on a keyboard, or struggles to look at a screen for more than a few minutes. So thinking about what supports are out there and what is a path from that supported structure to independent use, where people feel like they're at the point where they can start to problem solve for themselves.
Yeah, and Kim, if you have any thoughts about that, but also just kind of continuing with your research, like, what are some of the questions that for you were left unanswered that you would continue researching, or you think that other people might continue researching in terms of bringing older adults and technology together in a more productive way?
We'll get into this a little bit in the recommendations or call to action part, but a lot of large tech companies, have sort of inclusion programs and efforts, and I'm really curious as to how the findings of these efforts are then disseminated to the rest of the organization, the rest of the company for implementation. I'm also super curious as to who they involve in their studies. My study was a convenient sampling, so meaning, it wasn't just random sampling, it was just kind of finding the people who met the criteria for the study. But every single older adult that I interviewed was college educated, and that was just a coincidence. But college educated with 11 of the 15 holding graduate degrees. So I think another possible research study would be to look at the same population of people, but maybe less educated, and see if they have the same barriers identified for them as the particular group that I did.
Well, in what you've both said already, there's been a real focus on kind of thinking structures of access and meeting people where they are and defining sort of assistive technology by what users need, whether it's, being able to access a COVID test immediately or adapting an existing technology. So for both of you, and Sabine, we'll let you go first since Kim just talked. What does an inclusive digital space tool landscape look like? What's the dream?
The dream. Wow. I'm going to start with the baseline and build to the dream because, right now the bar is in the ground, at the center of the earth. So as a baseline, what I want to see is good access features and an awareness that people with disabilities use the space, use the tool. To me, when I roll up to a website that has good font, good layout, good contrast, I'm navigating it with no problems, but I also could test it with a screen reader and it would work, and I can see that it's navigable, and if I sent it to someone with a more complex bodily experience, I can feel pretty confident that they would be able to navigate it as well. That's what I like to see. And I want to know that the dream is that people with disabilities are included from the start in the design of digital tools and spaces and not an afterthought. And I think something that I see a lot on the sort of negative side is people think of access as something to check off that they think about at the end, which creates both bad access and a very confrontational relationship with the need to provide access. When you say you're designing a website and you go to your web designer and you're like, oh no, I forgot to make it so anyone with a disability can use my website, but we were done, but now we're not done, and they hit you with a big bill, your relationship with that concept is not super positive, right? That's not an ideal working environment. That sucks. And it sucks for the disabled user on the other side who has the kind of experience that happens when the thing that allows them to use the tool or space is an afterthought. It's very clear when that's what's happened. You can think about it in terms of the physical environment, like if a person with a wheelchair rolls up to a brand new building and realizes that a ramp was tacked onto the side of the service entrance, that's kind of that would be the analogous experience to rolling up to a website or a digital tool and finding that the access is just around the side and kind of shoddy.
And smelly.
Yeah. As an example, as a blind person, I play a lot of video games, and I already know what video games I can play, right? And so if I roll up to a game and I open it and the font is not adjustable and it's really small, I'm just mad. I'm like, if this had been part of the building process, it wouldn't be hard, but now it's hard, and I can't send you a postcard that says I can't read your game. I think that that forethought is a really critical part of how we can show people that they're welcome in the spaces or to use the tools that we're building.
And I'll add that Sabine's dream is my dream, so user-centered design, and I will also elaborate and talk about older adults a little bit. So this is a very heterogeneous group of people, and even more so than any other generation. So you cannot make assumptions that, for instance, in my study, that the 65-year-old was the most confident tech user and that the 87-year-old was not. In fact, I think the 86-year-old man that I interviewed, he has a YouTube channel. He creates travel logs. that are narrated, have music, that integrate Google Maps. Like, I don't even know how to do that. I wouldn't be able to do that. So it's not a group that you can, another example. The two most confident users, or two most confident participants of the study, were those who learned to use technology in school. The least confident, I will say, were those who kind of learned on their own, learned through family, etc. But there was not an age correlation. And if you talk about disabilities even, it was the 65-year-old who had glaucoma. So if you're designing for this group of older adults, and I'm calling older adults 65 plus, you cannot just say, well, you know, they have disabilities, they're all not confident users. That is not the experience at all, and that's why you've got to talk to the user. And in this group in particular, very different.
And so last question for both of you before we move on to the call to action. And we've addressed this a little bit with the, you know, bar in the ground versus the dream. So, but just any final thoughts about in relation to digital equity and access? What are you excited about in terms of what's happening, and what are you still frustrated about? Which I'm sure is a long list, but do the short list today.
Yeah, I picked one of each, so hopefully that's not too intimidating. So something I'm excited about, Kim mentioned the pandemic, and living in this sort of insular world right now. One of the big lessons, I think, from this time is we've been able to create a lot more access that previously, in a lot of cases, we, big capital W, we, organizations, workplaces, social engagement, have kind of thought was impossible or have behaved as if was too difficult to provide. So the ability to put in the work to make access happen for people working remotely, for people meeting remotely, for people meeting their social needs and their interpersonal needs in different ways. I think that's been a big learning experience that we've kind of had to do, and I would really like to see that carry forward. That's a big hope for me, and I think seeing that increased level of digital participation, it just reifies itself that a lot of times we design a space thinking, well, I've never seen a person with a disability in that room, so why should I make that room accessible? Mm-hmm. Once that space is accessible, you see people show up, and it kind of, that momentum is something that you can harness. And I really like to see that as something that we sort of take intentional notice of and advantage of. And something I'm frustrated with, I mean, I've just touched on the issues around, like, when someone is invisible and someone doesn't have support, they're not there in your space. They're not using your tool. That doesn't indicate a lack of interest. And I think mistaking a barrier for a lack of curiosity or a lack of interest is like a deeply uncurious and disappointing thing to do. And I'd really like to see more intentional engagement around, like, if I'm not seeing this community using my tool in my space, in my digital landscape, why is that, and can I facilitate a more supportive environment or better engagement?
And I'm excited by all the advocates in this room at this conference online. I'm thrilled that there's so many people. To Sabine's point, the pandemic really revealed a lot of disparities, and I think it's helped us in some ways kind of mobilize in spaces where perhaps there wasn't energy before. So I'm thrilled about that. I'll say I'm a little frustrated, and I think it has to do with ageism, but you know, trying to get on the radar of people, you know, people meaning tech companies. I've knocked on some big doors and not had great success. I have met with one tech company, but so that's been frustrating to me, just kind of, you know, like getting people to care, getting people to pay attention. I guess the good news is that I'm a very persistent person, so I'll just keep knocking until I find the right avenues and the right channels and advocates.
So before we move on to questions from me all, Kim and Sabine are going to talk about their call to action.
Yeah, how are we
for
doing
you
on
as a
time? I
group.
think you might have one more question for Kim.
Oh no, I think
no?
we covered it. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, amazing.
We
Then
got
let's then let's tell you what to do. My favorite part. Yeah, so Kim and I have collaboratively composed a call to action that we'd like to share with you. It was really exciting to collaborate on this presentation with Kim. We were not previously aware of each other, and our work is supporting different communities, but there's a lot of really, I think, critical places where it dovetails, and so it was really fun to collaborate on this. So in two parts, our call to action, we'd really like to strongly recommend and emphasize the importance of designing technology with a wide variety of users in mind. Make this a forethought and not an afterthought. Usability for the widest base of users facilitates greater self-advocacy and independence. And so that is something that the designer of the tool can give to the user, but that the user then gives back to the community around the use of that tool or space. We want to really encourage people to look at their hiring practices. Do you aggressively recruit people with disabilities and older adults? And what that necessitates, I think, is a real examination of what we consider of value in a workplace and whether that is serving us. I think when we say we value a diverse workforce, that means one thing, but when we really look at whether our hiring practices leave space for that and reflect that desire in a material way, I think that's the really critical piece. And then we want people to look also at their marketing and advertising and how they portray their users and what that says about who they see their users as being, whether that's a limited scope of people or whether that is truly an inclusive scope. And the design of the space or tool or digital landscape in general should reflect that.
Thanks, Sabine. I'll add a couple things to that. So older adults in particular, if you look at advertising that involves them with technology, they're not the most flattering pictures. And I know AARP has, I think they've collaborated, I think it's with Gallup perhaps, but to really change the narrative in terms of images and such. But 2 points I want to add on to what Sabine just said. So you don't need to be a hiring manager. You don't need to work in advertising. You don't need to be a recruiter to ask these questions about, are we hiring people with disabilities? Are we hiring older adults? So you don't have to work in those spaces. Every single one of us in this room can ask those kinds of questions. Everyone online watching can ask those questions. And part of the importance, again, back to older adults. So it's not only the right thing to do to design for older adults and make technology more inclusive for them, it's also the super smart thing for tech companies to do from a financial perspective. So this is also an AARP statistic. The tech spending power of the 50-plus group is expected to grow from $140 billion in 2018 to $645 billion in 2050. So there's a lot of money to be had there. And I know that that will excite a lot of tech companies in general. All right, second call to action. Evaluate ableism and ageist beliefs that both you and the systems that uphold them may possess. So Sabine and I, part of why we really enjoyed working together on this, and Melissa too, we're all kind of feisty. So we said without any doubt, people with disabilities and older adults are an oppressed and marginalized group. And let's just admit it, that is the reality. So let's acknowledge that, just like we all have biases, right? Unconscious or not, we all have biases. So think about how you feel about older adults. How do you feel about people with disabilities? And then do something about it.
Okay, so we have a good amount of time for questions. We wanted to make sure that you all had a chance to kind of talk about what you want more information about and ask questions of Kim and Sabine, and I can jump in if needed. But if you wouldn't mind coming to the microphone, that will just help in terms of providing more access, both in terms of people who are here in the room and online and the captions. So, and if you don't have questions, I've got some follow-up questions for these two, but we'll just open up the space, and we have about 15 minutes or so for questions, so. Yeah.
So it's kind of funny. I just really, like, I don't have a visual or hearing impairment, but I just really love this. I've been like grabbing my phone and taking snapshots of things I want to remember because it's so much faster. And, you know, we've been commenting about with the masks, also it's a lot harder to hear people.
Yeah.
One of the things that I really picked up on, you were talking about the website design. You know, we're looking at our classes because we have a lot of older adults in our classes online, and we have a lot of systems in place to help those people get up online. But are you aware of any automated ways to check your website to see how inclusive it is? Are there any sorts of programs that, I think there used to be one way back in the day. I'm old. But are you aware of any automated ways to look at the website and see, are there problems?
So I believe there are automated screen reader checkers that can kind of run through your website and see whether a screen reader is able to read it. But as much as you can, I definitely recommend consulting with a web designer who's familiar with the WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines.
Okay.
That'll give you a much more robust sense of, like, is the contrast good? Is the font good? Does it work on mobile? Does it work on different browsers, on different machines? So that would definitely strongly be my recommendation. I'll also say that ADDII, they are based up in Seattle in the same office as the ADA Center, and they do consulting on websites and have some great tools for taking a look at your website and making sure that the baseline of access is covered. I'll also say that there are widgets that you can add to a website to make it more accessible, but we want to be kind of careful when we recommend those because they don't fix existing access problems. They just add additional tools. So if your website isn't already accessible, if it doesn't already have good screen reader access and image description and things like that, captioning, it won't add them. It'll just add access over the top of a blank space. But those can be good tools if you're already in pretty good shape.
Okay, you know, being an older person, I'm constantly looking at, because a lot of the website designers are younger people.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, after you age around 50 plus, all of a sudden the eyes don't work as well for smaller text too. Mm-hmm. So it's not just, you know, little issues like that are things I'm constantly aware of, but I thank you for what you provided there.
Yeah, thank you.
I was going to add one other tool, if you want, is WebAIM, which is a web accessibility in mind. They're a nonprofit. They have a tool called the WAVE tool, and it's wave.webaim.org. You can run your website through that, and it will create a report. It's not perfect, but it's really good. And how I would use that is if you're working with a web designer, show them that report. Have them go through that report and fix those reported errors. It's alarming how little some web designers know about accessibility. And a lot of times there's knowledge about the concept, but not the action. And so I think that using that report in connection with whoever's working on your website is a really good tool, and it's free and it's very robust. So.
Cool.
Hi. Oh, sorry.
Hello.
Yeah, go ahead and then.
Oh, I'm
your
sorry.
question after. No, you're good.
Okay, cool. Ken, I was really excited to hear you speak. I work for the Ashbury Center in Cleveland. We specialize in training for older adults.
Oh, wonderful.
We have a computer lab, and we are expanding that. And I just wondered if you had any software or recommendations for how to consider accessibility in a computer lab, specifically for older adults. Because we're really in the beginning stages of trying to build that out, and maybe we can adjust our existing lab at the same time if there's some changes we need to make.
I would defer to maybe others in the room who would have a better idea than I know Oates has been around for a long time, and so I think maybe they would have some ideas about that. Are there anybody else in the room know of?
Yeah, I'm Amy Vandevelde from Oasis. We do have a free guide you can download from our website, and I'll try to get it into Sched and add it to your resources. I really appreciate everything that you're saying. I think that the woman who just spoke talked beautifully about how universal design is about making it easier for everybody. We can use captioning. If we can see, we can benefit from the captioning in the room. People who used to try to stream YouTube on the down low would turn on captions so that their audio wasn't on. But if you turn captions on a YouTube video and then show it over your Zoom, then if people are having audio issues, they can see the captions. So I think that it's so, I wish I had better recommendations directly for you, because the problem, Gina, as you know, is that we have all these different platforms. So you do different things on Android than you do on iOS, than you do on Windows, than you do on Mac. So our guide only covers Android and iOS, but I think that the universal help button is something that lots of people are looking for. Right. So getting the attention of tech and how you can get so much more usability from all people, if it's just easier, is what we're all needing to work together to help influence.
That's right. Thank you.
One resource, I think Washington State has a resource called Do It, DO-IT. And they have really, really good resources. And they have a specific resource about setting up an accessible computer lab with a list of software and hardware. So that's a good place to look. And if you email me, I can send you that resource directly. And just a pro tip for accessibility, a lot of universities get dinged by the Office of Civil Rights, and in response, they create really robust training materials for accessibility. So looking for accessibility training and guidance from universities is a really good way to go. So, yeah, and thanks for the additional information.
Yeah, any university you know has been required to make a transition plan recently is a great university's website to dig around.
You had a question in the front.
Thank you. Very interesting. I'm Richard Ferber. The history of the digital world is certainly a history of increasing accessibility. So from mainframes and assembly language, very limited number of people. High-level language, then finally things like the Apple II. But then even going from DOS to a graphical interface. Each time you're taking a look at the limited number of people that are using it, what's the most important way you can go to get the biggest jump? When you're talking about the elderly, I was wondering if you've looked at it the same way. There's all kinds of disabilities from memory problems, sight problems, joint problems, and to total paralysis, requiring all kinds of different things. But is there any way to prioritize in terms of, take a look at them as a group, what's the biggest hindrance right now that could get to the most people, and set that up in a way that it can be implemented, rather than just saying you can need to find somebody who can teach you or do this. Really have a program that could be handed to software company, handled to hardware companies, and so on.
I think you just came up with another research project. Really. I mean, I think that is something that needs to be studied and understood and prioritized. I'll say that the people that I studied, I did ask them about disabilities, and you know, there were some, I think 5 of the 15 identified disabilities, but again, they were not any that they reported impaired their ability to use technology. But I honestly think that's a very interesting question, and it's another research study.
I think in terms of how to make the biggest impact, one thing that both the community that you support and the disability community run into is in tech, there's a lack of consistency. And that's related to the field of many different companies of varying sizes making varying specialized products that don't always interact well with each other. And I think that creates a real barrier to learning and a barrier to thinking of yourself as an expert or as even a competent user. And versus when you can show someone how to use something and then they can turn around and apply it to the next thing they want to learn how to do. I think there's a real burnout to not being a prioritized user and then also starting fresh with every new tool. Another big issue that we run into specifically in the disability community is that I think is an actual area of work that tech companies could do is the lack of functional communication between more complex, dedicated technology that people with disabilities use every day, like a communication device, or like devices that allow someone with paralysis or limited mobility to access the internet. Those often interface really well with some digital tools and really poorly with others. And I think better knowledge on the part of tech companies about those specialized tools would both kind of help with consistency in some ways, and also would really make an impact on people with complex bodies who use complex tools.
Kim, Sabine, thank you for an inspiring talk. I live in a widget world, unfortunately. My organization, Literacy Minnesota, teaches English, civics, and GED classes in the basement of churches and libraries. Mm-hmm. My question is, how do we encourage persistence among learners, whether they're older adults or people with disabilities? I heard widgets, I hear the transition plans from universities. What else would you recommend in this widget world on the ground that I'm living in? Thanks.
Do you want to go first?
Sure. Encouraging persistence. Yeah. I mean, when we think about, well, I don't know if I have a lot to say about widgets specifically, but...
I'll jump in with persistence is our term that we receive from our state education department of when learners access a certain amount of class time, mm-hmm. contact hours, we're working with them. That's the term that is used to describe how persistent a learner is. That's not me saying, putting the obligation on our clients.
I understand.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, thank you for that. I appreciate that. So it sounds like maybe you're seeing more burnout from those populations not achieving that level.
I think what you define as capital A access and lowercase a access,
Yeah.
those are populations that we work with.
Understood.
But, yeah.
Understood. Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think it is in that situation, a big struggle is going to be how much support can you and your organization provide on a one-to-one or group basis versus what tools are available to help those folks feel successful, being independent in reaching the level that you want them to reach and that they're there with the intention of reaching. I think looking for, I don't know if you have anything along the lines of a resource center or people who have some bandwidth to look for those kinds of resources and pull them together in a manner that is approachable to those learners. That might be a good use of time. Getting as much as, I mean, especially in an educational environment, as much as you can streamline the way that the materials are delivered so that people can focus on taking in the information and not navigating multiple new systems of information delivery. I think that's really valuable. But obviously I don't know to what degree that's inside of your control. I think that's definitely something that education spaces run into a lot, is trying to get educators and programs kind of on the same page in terms of how many tools they're asking people to use concurrently, and how to pull that back a little bit to facilitate like learning happening at the learning level and not at the logistical level. That is a long way of saying concretely, I don't know what to offer you. But if you'd like to talk more, you are more than welcome to reach out.
Yeah, the reflection's welcome. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
So one of the lenses through which I looked at my study was the relative deprivation theory, which basically says unless you feel that by missing out on, say, using technology, you are not able to interact with friends, gather information and resources, you're not going to advocate for access. And then there was another theory, which was the technology readiness assessment theory, which means that if I see this tool, say it's a laptop, smartphone, if I can see and learn and see how powerful it is and how much it's going to help me, then I will therefore be willing to try to use it. So the research I came across also said that with older adults in particular, working in an environment where they feel safe, and again, there's some very tech-savvy older adults, so I think kind of tailoring the class to the user, but repetitive learning was really important, and opening a document, saving a document, finding the document. So I think it kind of starts with, prioritizing, like, let's say you have a class. What's most important to you to learn, right? Is it learning email? Is it shopping online? What are your basic needs that you want to make sure you master? And then not going too fast. And, maybe a lot of repetition. Like, I find that with my mom. We've gone over things, but I have to do it again. And so just they have to feel comfortable, safe, feel that the person teaching them is going to be patient, is not judging them. So I think a lot of those things would help with older adults in particular.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're out of time for more questions. I know there were more questions, and I apologize that we didn't have time to field those, but as you can tell, we're all passionate about accessibility, and we are happy to continue the conversation. So please reach out either here or by email. And I will add that we've included in our slide deck just a very short list of resources. The reason is the resource list could be endlessly long, and so we opted for a short list to get you started in some of the directions that we talked about. But if you want more resources, if there are specific things, feel free to reach out. I'm sure that, I mean, I don't want to speak for Kim and Sabine, but I'm sure they will be happy to send you more resources, and I would as well. So please continue the conversation, and thank you for being here, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
And I have one closing
Yes.
comment, if I may. So I feel that how well we look after and care for the most marginalized people of our society is a reflection of how healthy we are as a society. So I just want to leave you with that thought. And I think we're going into lunch now, so if anyone else has questions, I'm happy to stay as well.